The room fell completely silent as Emma, clutching her crumpled $5 bill, stood in the doorway of the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse. It was hard for her to keep her hands from shaking as she looked up at the 15 massive bikers who filled the room, each one a mountain of muscle, tattoos, and scars. The low hum of conversation and the clink of beer bottles halted instantly. Every man in the room knew the reputation of the club, and none of them were prepared for what Emma was about to ask. She stepped forward, her eyes wide with determination, but her voice trembling. "Will you save my mom?" she asked, her words barely a whisper. "I have $5. Please, will you help me?" Hammer, the chapter president, set down his cards and looked up at the girl. At 6 feet 5 inches and 280 pounds, with muscles that could crush a steel pipe, Hammer was a terrifying sight to most. But Emma didn't flinch. There was something about her, a quiet courage, a desperation that reached right into his chest. He could see the crumpled bill in her tiny hand, the raw fear in her eyes. It was a plea for help like he'd never seen before. "Your name's Sweetheart?" Hammer's voice was gruff, but surprisingly gentle, his voice softening for a moment. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Rodriguez." "Emma," Hammer repeated, his gaze softening, though his mind was already racing. "Where's your mom?" At the mention of her mother, Emma's face crumpled for a second, her lip trembling. She swallowed hard, but the words tumbled out, jagged and desperate. "She's in the hospital, dying. The doctors say she needs a special medicine, $50,000. We don't have insurance. I heard my uncle, he said he'd pay for it, but only if I go live with him forever." The last part of her sentence hung in the air like a heavy fog. Hammer's eyes narrowed as he saw Emma's face twist in fear. He knew what she meant by that. She wasn't just asking for a place to stay. "And your uncle?" Tank, the sergeant-at-arms, spoke up, his massive frame shifting slightly as he stood near the bar, eyes locked on the girl. His voice was low and dangerous. "He's outside in his car," Emma said, almost too quietly. "He told me bikers are criminals, and if I came in here asking for help, you'd just take my money and laugh at me. But I don't care anymore. My mom is all I have." The bikers exchanged glances, and Hammer felt his gut tighten. They all knew exactly what "bad man" meant when a 9-year-old said it with that kind of fear in her voice. Tank shifted uncomfortably, his face hardening. "Where's this uncle now?" he asked. Emma pointed out the window, her voice barely audible. "He's in the parking lot, in a black Mercedes. He's on the phone, not even looking at the door. I think he's sure I'll fail. That nobody will help me." Tank turned to Wrench, the club's mechanic, who had been silently observing. "Wrench," Tank muttered, "check it out. Let's see what this guy is really about." Without a word, Wrench moved to the window, his eyes scanning the parking lot. After a brief pause, he muttered, "Black Mercedes, engine running. Driver's on the phone. Confident or stupid?" "Probably both," Hammer said, standing up and walking toward Emma. His massive form loomed over her, but his voice remained calm. "Emma, where is your mom?" "St. Mary's," she said. "Room 304. She's got cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say the treatment could save her, but we don't have the money for it." Hammer's jaw clenched as he watched Emma hold out her $5, her tiny fingers trembling. "This is all I have," she whispered. "Please, please help me." For a long moment, Hammer stared at the crumpled bill in her hand. His heart tightened. $5. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But the sincerity in her eyes told him something else. This girl was trying to save her mom, and this $5 was all she had left to give. "Keep your money, Emma," Hammer said softly, his voice low and firm. "We'll help you." He paused, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "But first, we need to talk to your uncle." Emma's eyes went wide with fear. "He'll get mad. When he gets mad, She stopped herself mid-sentence, touching her sleeve, where a bruise was barely visible under the fabric. The bikers saw the bruise. They saw the way she hesitated, and everything they needed to know about her uncle's true nature became clear in that instant. "Stay here," Hammer ordered, his voice cold with authority. "Raven, stay with Emma." The rest of you outside. Now. The bikers filed out in formation, the tension in the air thick enough to slice through. Outside, Emma's uncle, Robert Chun, still sat in his car, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. The cool, night air hung heavy as the Iron Brotherhood bikers stepped outside, their boots hitting the ground in unison. The sound echoed off the clubhouse walls, a sharp contrast to the silence inside. Emma's trembling voice still rang in their ears as they moved toward the parking lot, where Robert Chun, her uncle, was parked in his black Mercedes. Robert's face, a mix of arrogance and feigned indifference, didn't change as the bikers closed in on his car. He didn't even bother to put his phone down, his eyes still glued to the screen as he continued whatever conversation he was having. The world, it seemed, was still his to control. But tonight, the world was about to change. Hammer led the way, his broad shoulders blocking out the moonlight as he moved toward Robert's car. The other bikers flanked him, their faces grim, their eyes hard. The power dynamics were shifting, and Robert was about to learn just how much power he didn't have. "Hey, Robert," Hammer's voice cut through the night air. A growl that made the hairs on the back of Robert's neck stand up. "Mind if we have a word?" Robert glanced up from his phone, his smug smile faltering for the briefest moment. "What's this about Hammer?" he asked, his tone casual but with an edge of uncertainty creeping in. He'd heard the rumors about the club, but seeing the bikers so close, so many of them, was different than the stories. Hammer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling across Robert's face as he loomed over him. "You know why we're here. Your niece," Hammer's voice dropped lower, more menacing, "came to us asking for help. She doesn't want your so-called help. She wants her mother's life saved. You think you can just walk in here and manipulate her? You've got another thing coming." Robert's smile twisted, but his eyes shifted nervously now. "You're wrong," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm trying to do what's best for my family. She's just a kid, doesn't know what's good for her. I'm offering to pay for the treatment. What's the problem?" "The problem," Tank cut in from behind, his massive arms crossed, "is that you're using her mother's illness as leverage to get what you want. You think that $50,000 is a price for her life? You're just as sick as the disease you're trying to exploit." Robert's face reddened, and he shot Tank a venomous glare. "You don't know anything about family," he spat. "I'm trying to protect Emma's future. Her mother's too sick to care for her. I'm the only one left. You can't even understand what it's like to look out for someone you love." Hammer stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. "I understand more than you think, Robert. I've seen men like you before. You hide behind money, behind promises, but we both know you're just a predator, and I'm not going to let you take her." Robert scoffed, trying to maintain his stance. "You're threatening me now? You think I'm scared of a bunch of bikers?" "We're not just bikers, Robert," Wrench said, his voice low as he stepped forward. "We're men who've been through hell and come out the other side. We don't let people like you get away with this shit." The tension in the air was thick, and for a brief moment Robert's facade cracked. He realized that the bikers weren't going to back down. In fact, they were the ones who had control now. Just as Robert's fingers hovered over his phone to dial the police, Wrench leaned in close to the driver's side window. "Go ahead. Call them," he said with a dark smile. "Tell them how the Iron Brotherhood's holding you hostage. I'm sure they'll be real understanding." For a split second, Robert's fingers froze on the phone screen. His eyes darted around the group of bikers, and he could feel the weight of their gazes, each one watching him with silent, deadly intensity. "You don't want to do that," Tank said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Trust me. If you call the cops, they won't be the only ones you're dealing with." Robert's breath hitched and his mind raced. He was outnumbered, outmatched. The bikers weren't afraid of him. And now, for the first time in his life, Robert felt a gnawing fear claw at his gut. Hammer's next words cut through the air like a blade. "We know about your past, Robert. The name change, the allegations, the investigation in Oregon, the settlements. You can run, but you can't hide. Not from us. Not from the truth." Robert's face went pale. He tried to maintain his composure, but his words faltered. "How do you know that?" Hammer took a slow step back, letting the silence hang between them like a sword ready to drop. "I've got connections," he said with a grim smile. "I find things out. And now I've found you." Robert's eyes darted to the other bikers, each one standing motionless, their expressions cold and unwavering. His options were dwindling by the second. "Here's what's going to happen," Hammer continued. "You're going to leave, and you're never coming back. You'll stay the hell away from Emma and her mother. And if you try anything, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." For a moment, Robert seemed to consider his options, but the weight of the situation was crushing him. His eyes flickered with something like calculation, but it quickly faded into fear. He wasn't dealing with just anyone. These men didn't play by the same rules he did. With a final, frustrated growl, Robert shoved his phone back into his pocket and yanked open the door. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his eyes wild. Hammer didn't flinch. "No, Robert, you will." The bikers watched in silence as Robert climbed into his car, the engine roaring to life as he peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing in his retreat. "Don't come back," Tank muttered under his breath, watching the car disappear into the night. The atmosphere inside the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse had shifted. What had once been a rowdy, unpredictable gathering of bikers now felt like a war room. Phones were ringing non-stop, the clicking of keyboards echoed across the room, and the low murmur of conversation was interrupted only by occasional commands from Hammer, who paced with a rare intensity in his eyes. Emma sat quietly in the corner, her small hands clutching the crumpled $5 bill that had started this whole chain of events. She hadn't said a word since her uncle left, and Hammer knew she was still processing everything. "Doc," Hammer called out, his voice commanding yet calm. "Any updates from the hospital?" Doc, the club's medic, looked up from his phone, his expression grim. He'd been making calls all night to gather information and track down the necessary contacts. "I got through to Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's. Rosa's condition is deteriorating fast. The experimental treatment could work, but it's still a long shot." He paused, his jaw tight. "The treatment is experimental, but it could save her. The cost is $50,000, and without insurance, that's the price for her life." Tank, who had been standing by the window, turned around, his massive arms crossed. "And we don't exactly have $50,000 just lying around," he said, his voice low. "We need to come up with that cash fast." Hammer's eyes flickered to Emma, who was sitting silently in the corner. She hadn't moved since Robert left. Her face, pale and tired, betrayed the stress she was under. He knew that the longer they waited, the slimmer her mother's chances became. But they had one thing that Robert didn't, the code of the Brotherhood. "I've got some contacts," Wrench spoke up, his fingers already typing away on his laptop. "I can set up a crowdfunding page. This'll go viral in hours. We've got connections in the media, we can make some calls. If we pull this off right, we might just raise the money." Hammer nodded. "Do it." Wrench's fingers flew across the keyboard, setting up a page titled Iron Brotherhood Rescues Dying Mother. He shared the link with the rest of the club, and soon the phones were ringing off the hook as bikers from other chapters started pledging donations. "Let's go," Tank said, already pulling out his own phone and making calls. "I'll call in favors from the veteran support networks. Medical fundraising contacts. I know a few." Raven, who had been sitting with Emma, reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. "I'll get in touch with the social work community. There are people who will donate if we frame this right. It's a good cause. People will want to help." As the bikers worked furiously to gather funds, Emma sat quietly, unsure of what to do. She had never experienced kindness like this before, at least not from anyone outside her immediate family. Her uncle had always been the one who made the decisions for her, dictating her every move. But now these strangers, these bikers, were willing to go to unimaginable lengths to help her. Hammer approached her cautiously, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "Emma," he said softly, "we're going to do everything we can to save your mom. You don't need to worry about the money. We've got this." Her eyes, red from tears she hadn't let fall, met his. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders. "But What if it's not enough? What if? It will be enough, Hammer interrupted gently. We're not backing down, and neither are you. Emma nodded slowly, unsure but comforted by his words. In that moment, something inside her shifted. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything could be okay. Minutes turned to hours as the bikers tirelessly worked to raise the money. They reached out to everyone they knew, veterans groups, local businesses, even the media. The story of a little girl willing to offer everything she had to save her mother's life spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with donations, and the money started rolling in. By 3 a.m., they had raised $30,000. By dawn, they had hit $50,000. But it didn't stop there. Keep it coming, Wrench said, grinning as the numbers continued to climb on his screen. We're almost there, and this is going to be huge. As the donations kept pouring in, Emma's face slowly transformed from uncertainty to cautious hope. She hadn't spoken much, but the weight of everything was beginning to lift from her shoulders. She watched the bikers, all of them hard men with dark pasts, working relentlessly to secure her mother's future. It didn't make sense. Why would they go this far for her? But somewhere deep inside, Emma knew the answer. It was because they were her family now. As the sun began to rise, the final numbers came in. By noon the next day, the total had reached $75,000, enough to cover the treatment and even provide for Emma and her mother's living expenses for the next few months while Rosa recovered. Hammer stood up, wiping his hand across his face, exhaustion written on his features but determination still burning in his eyes. It's done. We did it. Time to get to the hospital, Tank said, his voice gruff with emotion he wasn't used to showing. Raven looked at Emma, her face softening. You ready, sweetheart? Emma looked up at Raven, her eyes wide with disbelief. Are we really going to save her? Raven smiled, a warmth that cut through the rough exterior she wore. We're going to save her, Emma. We're going to make sure your mom gets the treatment she needs, and then we're going to take care of both of you. Emma's lips trembled as she stood up slowly, her knees weak from the stress of the past few hours. She took a deep breath, her heart heavy with gratitude. She had never expected any of this, but the bikers had come through for her. They had become her family. Hammer walked to the door, his massive frame casting a shadow over the room. Let's move out. Time's wasting. As the bikers filed out of the clubhouse and into their bikes, Emma stood in the doorway, watching them with a mixture of awe and disbelief. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel so alone. She had a family, a group of people who would fight for her and her mother no matter what. The hospital was quiet in the early morning light, the air thick, with the lingering scent of antiseptic. Hammer, Raven, Doc, and Emma arrived at St. Mary's Hospital just as the sun began to rise, casting long shadows down the sterile hallway. The bikers, still dressed in their leather vests, moved with purpose, their boots echoing against the tiles. Emma, clutching Raven's hand, walked beside them, her small frame dwarfed by the towering men around her. She could barely believe this was happening. The bikers were about to make good on their promise to save her mother. After the night of frantic fundraising, the $75,000 they had raised had been wired directly to the hospital. The treatment was ready to begin, but Emma's heart was still heavy. Even though the bikers had done everything they could, even though they had rallied to her mother's side, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread in her chest. It wasn't over yet. Not until her mother was healthy, not until her uncle was gone for good. They reached Rosa's room on the 3rd floor, where Dr. Martinez, the lead oncologist, was waiting for them. He looked up when they entered, his expression neutral but wary. He had clearly heard about the bikers' involvement, and though he was a professional, there was no mistaking his wariness. You're here to pay for the treatment? Dr. Martinez asked, glancing at Hammer's leather vest before looking back at Emma. His words were measured, cautious. We're here to save her, Hammer said flatly, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken promise. Emma told us everything. She's part of the Brotherhood now, and we protect our own. Dr. Martinez nodded slowly, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. The treatment will start as soon as the paperwork is processed, he said. But I need to be honest with you. Even with the medicine, her chances are slim. This is experimental. The doctors have already told her that. We'll take that chance, Raven spoke up, her voice steady and firm. Emma's mother has fought too long to give up now. We won't let her lose this fight. Dr. Martinez seemed to pause, considering her words. Finally, he gave a single nod, his expression softening. I understand. We'll do everything we can. But we have to move quickly. As the doctor moved to finalize the last few details for the treatment, Hammer turned toward Emma. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The girl had been through too much already, and now she was facing the possibility of losing her only parent. It wasn't fair. Emma looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. What if it doesn't work? What if my mom doesn't survive? Hammer's face softened as he crouched down to meet her eyes. Then we'll deal with it, Emma. But right now, we focus on what we can control. Your mom's getting the treatment she needs. You've done everything you can. You're not alone in this anymore. We're not going anywhere. Emma nodded, her chest tight as she held onto Raven's hand. The hospital room felt colder than before, despite the warmth of the sun creeping through the blinds. Her mother was still unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. The heavy, sterile air in the room was a constant reminder of the battle ahead. And then, without warning, Emma's worst fear came to life. The door to the room swung open with a creak and Robertson walked in. His confident stride faltered for a moment when he saw the bikers standing around the bed. His eyes went from Emma to Hammer, and for a moment, something cold and calculating flickered in his gaze. You! Robert spat, pointing a shaking finger at Hammer. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine? Hammer didn't flinch. This is over, Robert, he said quietly. You don't have any claim over Emma. Or her mother. You're leaving. Now. Robert's face flushed with anger. I'm not going anywhere, he hissed. I'm her family. You think you can just step in and replace me? You're nothing but a bunch of thugs. She needs me, not you. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at her uncle. His words, full of venom, cut through her like a knife. She knew what kind of man he was, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel all the more real. He was trying to take her mother's life and turn it into a bargaining chip. But she was done with him. She had to be. She doesn't need you, Emma said, her voice trembling but growing stronger. You don't love her. You only want control. You think money can fix everything, but it can't. You're not a part of our family anymore. Robert's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. He stepped closer to Emma, but before he could say anything, Tank moved forward, blocking his path with ease. You're done here, Tank growled, his arms crossed like an impenetrable wall. And if you try anything else, we'll make sure it's the last mistake you ever make. Robert's eyes flickered with uncertainty now, but his pride wasn't about to let him back down. He raised his phone, his fingers trembling. I'll call the cops, he threatened, his voice cracking. You're holding me against my will. I'll make sure you all pay for this. Hammer stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. Call them. We'll wait. Robert hesitated. His gaze flicked to the door, then back to the bikers who filled the room. He realized, too late, that he had no control here. He wasn't in charge anymore. Doc, who had been silently observing the confrontation, spoke up. I just got off the phone with Dr. Martinez. You know what he said? Rosa Rodriguez is too sick to fight back. The only thing that matters is that she gets a chance. You're not going to take that away from her. The room fell silent. Robert's face was flushed with embarrassment, but his pride was still pushing him forward. Finally, he backed away, turning to leave with a final glare at Emma. This isn't over, he said. I'll find a way to get what I'm owed. Hammer didn't respond. He just watched as Robert stormed out of the room, leaving the bikers to handle what was truly important, Emma, her mother, and the future. The sterile, dimly lit room at St. Mary's Hospital had taken on a new energy as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds. The bikers remained vigilant, sitting quietly in the corner, each one lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the past few hours had finally started to settle, but there was no real rest for any of them. Not until they knew that Rosa would be okay. Emma sat beside her mother's bed, her hand clutching Rosa's. She hadn't let go since they'd arrived at the hospital. Rosa lay unconscious, the weight of the illness ravaging her body, but her chest rose and fell steadily. The doctors had already started the experimental treatment. The hope was thin, but it was still there. And as Emma sat in the chair, her heart ached with the kind of raw pain only someone who had loved a parent for so long could understand. The door to the room creaked open, and Dr. Martinez stepped inside. His usual composure had slipped, revealing the edge of concern that he couldn't hide anymore. "How is she?" Emma asked softly, her voice cracking. Dr. Martinez sighed and moved closer to the bed, adjusting the 4-drip that ran into Rosa's arm. "We've started the treatment, but—" His words trailed off as he adjusted the oxygen mask on Rosa's face. "She's still in critical condition. I can't promise anything. Even with the treatment, we have to monitor her closely." Emma's stomach tightened. The fear gnawed at her insides, but she couldn't show it. Not now, not when she was so close to the chance of saving her mother. "I understand," Emma whispered, her voice firm despite the tears that pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you for trying." "Keep in mind," Dr. Martinez said, his tone cautious, "we're in uncharted territory here. If we don't see improvement in the next 48 hours, we may need to reconsider." Emma nodded, though her heart was heavy. Just do everything you can. "We will," Dr. Martinez assured her. "But I need you to be realistic. There's a chance, but it's a small one." As the doctor left, Emma felt a flicker of doubt. What if it wasn't enough? What if all of this was in vain? But she shook her head, pushing the thought away. She couldn't let herself go down that road. Not now. Outside the room, Hammer and the rest of the bikers had gathered in the waiting area. Raven was talking quietly with Doc, who had been handling the medical details with the hospital. Tank stood by the window, his arms crossed, his jaw tight with worry. The minutes stretched on like hours. Every time a nurse or doctor passed by, they all held their breath, waiting for news. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, and Dr. Martinez entered again. He looked exhausted, his face etched with concern. "She's showing signs of improvement," Dr. Martinez said, his voice a little less strained than before. "Her vitals are stabilizing, and we're seeing some positive reactions to the treatment. I'm cautiously optimistic, but we'll need to keep her under observation for the next few days." Emma's heart soared. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel hope. The weight of the world lifted just for a moment. "You mean she might make it?" "We're not out of the woods yet," Dr. Martinez warned, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "But this is the best news we've had so far. It's a start." Emma stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice a whisper, but full of emotion. "You're welcome," Dr. Martinez replied, nodding with a faint smile before he left the room to attend his rounds. The bikers outside looked at each other, the tension in the room giving way to relief. Hammer let out a long breath, his fists uncurling as the pressure lifted. "She's fighting," he said quietly, almost to himself. "She's gonna make it." Raven, standing nearby, put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "We've got this kid," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Your mom's not going anywhere." Emma nodded, still unable to believe the shift in the atmosphere. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks, maybe even months. The bikers hadn't just helped raise the money, they had become her family. They were her strength now. The next few hours passed in a blur of waiting. Emma stayed by her mother's side, her fingers intertwined with Rosa's as the treatment took effect. The minutes stretched, but the world seemed a little brighter. Rosa's breathing had steadied, and Emma found herself holding her breath every time the monitor beeped, waiting for another sign of life. And then, at some point, it happened. Rosa's eyes fluttered open. Weak and groggy, she looked around the room as if she were unsure of where she was. Emma squeezed her hand tighter, her voice trembling. "Mama, can you hear me?" Rosa blinked a few times, then focused on Emma's face. Her lips parted slightly and she whispered, "Emma, is that you?" Tears filled Emma's eyes, and she nodded, her heart swelling with relief. "I'm here, Mama. You're going to be okay. We're going to make it through this." Rosa's lips quivered as she tried to speak, but the effort was too much for her. Emma gently placed a finger to her mother's lips. "Rest, Mama. You don't have to say anything right now. Just rest." Rosa closed her eyes again, her breathing still shallow but steady. Emma felt a weight lift from her chest. Her mother was fighting. They were going to win this. Outside the room, Hammer, Raven, and the other bikers stood in quiet solidarity. They had done what they promised. They had delivered. They had fought for Emma's family, and now it was time for Rosa to fight for her life. Hammer looked at the others, his face a mask of quiet determination. "We're not leaving until she's better," he said, his voice gruff but filled with a quiet, unshakable conviction. "We stay with Emma, and we make sure she's got everything she needs. We protect our own." Always, Tank added, his voice low but firm. "We don't quit. Not now. Not ever." The rest of the bikers nodded in agreement, their eyes hard with the knowledge that this fight was far from over. But for the first time, it felt like they were winning. Emma looked out at them from the window, her face filled with gratitude. She had walked into the Iron Brotherhood's clubhouse asking for help, and now she knew that they weren't just a group of men, they were her family, her protectors, and together they would face whatever came next. The days that followed Rosa's recovery were nothing short of miraculous. Each morning, as the sun crept through the blinds of St. Mary's Hospital, Emma felt a renewed sense of hope. The once grim and uncertain air around her had given way to a quiet optimism. Rosa was awake more often now, and every small improvement was a victory. Emma spent every moment she could by her mother's side. They talked, held hands, and shared quiet moments as Rosa slowly regained her strength. There were still tough days ahead, but the worst was behind them. The treatment was working, but as much as Emma longed to focus only on her mother's health, there was something else nagging at the back of her mind. Robert. Even though he had been driven away by the bikers, she knew he wasn't the type to give up easily. He was dangerous, manipulative, and his obsession with taking control of Emma's life wasn't something that could be dismissed so quickly. One morning, after Rosa had taken a turn for the better, Emma found herself walking down the quiet hospital corridor. She was lost in thought when she bumped into Hammer, who was waiting outside her mother's room. "You all right, kid?" Hammer asked, his voice gentle but carrying a weight of experience. He'd seen too many lives ruined to ignore the look in Emma's eyes. Emma nodded but couldn't mask the concern in her face. "I'm fine, but I keep thinking about Robert. He's not going to give up. He'll try to come back for me." Hammer's jaw clenched. He knew Emma was right. Even though Robert had been humiliated in front of the club, a man like that never backed down so easily. "Listen," Hammer said, his voice steady, "you're not going to be alone. We'll make sure he stays away, but we've got to be ready for anything." Emma swallowed hard, the reality of her situation settling in. "I don't want him near my mom again. I don't ever want to see him again." "You won't," Hammer promised. "You've got the Brotherhood behind you now. We'll make sure he doesn't get anywhere near either of you." The weight of his words was comforting. Emma had never felt safer, not even when she was living with her mother and Robert. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a real family, one that would protect her no matter what. Raven appeared then, walking toward them with a warm smile on her face. "She's awake," Raven said, nodding toward Rosa's room. "Your mom's asking for you, Emma. Come on, let's go in." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her mother was awake, truly awake for the first time in days. She followed Raven and Hammer into the room, where Rosa was propped up in bed, looking frail but alert. Her eyes lit up when she saw Emma, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Mama," Emma whispered, rushing to her side. Rosa reached out weakly, her fingers brushing against Emma's. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper but filled with love. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to go through all this. You're too young to carry this burden." Emma shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. You don't need to apologize, Mama. I'm just glad you're here. You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Rosa's gaze flickered to the door, where Hammer and Raven stood quietly, watching from the sidelines. She seemed to recognize the change in the air, the sense of security that had come with Emma's new family. Who are they? Rosa asked softly, her voice still weak from the illness. They're the ones who helped us, Mama, Emma said, her voice full of gratitude. They're my family now. They saved us. Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she turned to look at Hammer, his massive form standing like a quiet protector in the corner. She could see the kindness in his eyes, despite his imposing figure. And then her gaze shifted to Raven, who had a warmth and strength that reminded her of the women who had always been there for her. Thank you, Rosa whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Thank you for saving my daughter, for saving me. I don't know how to repay you. Hammer gave a slight nod, his face unreadable. You don't owe us anything, Rosa, he said quietly. You're family now. And that's what family does. We protect each other. Emma watched the exchange, a sense of peace settling over her. She knew, deep down, that the bikers had become more than just protectors. They had become her second family, and now her mother could finally rest, knowing that Emma was in safe hands. As the days went by, Rosa's recovery continued. Slowly but steadily, she grew stronger and her spirits lifted. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they knew it would take time. The experimental treatment had worked far better than they expected, and for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope that Rosa might just beat the odds. But Emma knew the battle wasn't over. As Rosa rested and gained strength, Emma had to start thinking about her own future. She couldn't go back to the life she had known with Robert. She had a new chance at life, one that she would build with the people who had shown her that there was more to family than blood. One evening, after visiting her mother, Emma found herself standing outside the clubhouse with Raven. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she stared up at the stars, feeling a sense of calm she had never known before. I've been thinking, Emma said, her voice quiet but full of determination. I want to help people, too, like you. Raven looked at her, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Help people, she asked. Yeah, Emma replied. I want to work with kids who've been through what I've been through. People who need help. I don't know how yet, but I want to make a difference. Raven smiled, a soft, knowing smile. You'll do great, Emma. You've already started making a difference by being brave enough to walk into that clubhouse. You've got a lot of heart. Emma smiled back, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She had a future now, and for the first time in her life, it was hers to shape. As the story comes to an end, the biker's influence on Emma's life will forever shape her future. It's a reminder that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the people who protect you the most are the ones society fears the most. If you've been inspired by Emma's journey and the kindness of the Iron Brotherhood, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in the power of second chances, hit that subscribe button. You never know who might need a little hope today.